Welcome to Strip Cover Lit, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Fort, and we are here for another poetry discussion. This poetry discussion comes to us from the hallowed pages of Charles Bukowski's The Pleasures of the Damned. It is on page 345, the poem titled She Comes From Somewhere. The poem reads as such. She comes from somewhere, probably from the belly button, or from the shoe under the bed, or maybe from the mouth of the shark, or from the car crash on the avenue that leaves blood and memories scattered across the grass. She comes from love gone wrong under an asphalt moon. She comes from screams stuffed with cotton. She comes from hands without arms, and arms without bodies, and bodies without hearts. She comes out of cannons and shotguns and old Victrolas. She comes from parasites with blue eyes and soft voices. She comes out from under the organ like a roach. She keeps coming. She's inside of sardine cans and letters. She's under your fingernails pressing blue and flat. She's the signpost on the barricade smeared in town. She's the toy soldiers inside your head, poking their lead bayonets. She's the first kiss and the last kiss, and the dog's guts spilling like a river. She comes from somewhere and never stops coming. Me and that old woman, Sorrow. So I wanted to highlight this poem because it's a really good example of why a lot of literary snobs don't like Charles Bukowski. And everyone has their own taste in poetry, but there are some people, gatekeeper types, that will tell you Charles Bukowski is not poetry. And a lot of those reasons why they will cite, a lot of the reasons they will cite as to why, are on full display in this poem. It's crass. This poem is crass, not as crass as many other Bukowskis. I can give you that. She comes out from under the organ like a roach. The dog's guts spilling like a river. These are crass images. These are not things which necessarily go to further explicate some grand idea or some minute detail or anything in between. These are things which are unpleasant to think about for the sake of their unpleasantness. But it's not just about being crass. This poem has the gotcha ending. Oh, it's not the girl with the red hair. It's not Jane. It's an emotion. I lured you in with this simple prose and then ripped the carpet out from under you at the end here. That is a trick, an M. Night Shyamalan ending to a poem, right? And it has something so simple as personification of sorrow. This is a very old trick in poetry, one that can be seen as extremely simplistic. My love is a red, red rose, right? That's not personification, but when you were simply exchanging one thing out for another in a poem, an idea, a thing, a person, anything like that, it is seen as one of these cheap tricks that we have as poets evolved past. But I beg to differ. I beg to differ with literary snobs because I think a lot of what happens in poetry is that you have to meet an audience where the audience is. I can't tell you how many people I've been making videos about poems on the internet for 5 years now. I can't tell you how many people in that time have come to me and said Bukowski is very special to them. And how many of those people don't have literary degrees. And that's a big deal. There's a reason. There are many reasons. I'm going to cite this reason in this video as to one of the reasons why literature is dying. Literature is dying because there's a great disconnect from people. This is why when we have something which is so very on the nose as superhero films hit mainstream and they take off. Now, a literary snob will also tell you that these superhero films are not literature. I've said 1,000 times on this channel, and I will say 1,000 times more, I'm sure. You can take William Shakespeare to an ass, and he'll be able to tell you therein lies literature. But a true testament to someone who is able to see literature, true testament to something intelligent, something like intelligence in a person, is to be able to bring them the Sunday papers, the funnies, and that person being able to look in there and say, yeah, you see, here's a literary turn inside Garfield. I don't remember any of the other comics. I'm sorry, but you know what I'm saying. Comic strip. There's literature in there. It is a true testament to something like intelligence to be able to extract grandiose literature, high literature, from something like Garfield, as opposed to simply pointing at high literature in high literature. You point at William Shakespeare and you say there's literature happening in there. Well, yeah, dumbass, of course there is. So people being able to connect with this poetry is something extremely crucial to poetry. But it should also not be something which is written off by literati, by literary snobs. It shouldn't be, because it's always worth starting at first principles. It's always worth running back the original arguments. Why? Because keeping the original arguments in mind keeps you sharp, but also keeping the original arguments in mind is what allows you to connect with the audience. You look at something like professional wrestling. There's heels and baby faces. Why? Because it's simple. Why? Because there's lots of children in the audience. Why? Because it's a very simple type of storytelling. Two guys are going to fight. One's a good guy, one's a bad guy. Hopefully that good guy wins. It's a very early type of storytelling. Now, let's see, when I was in high school, there were different factions. There was the NWO, there was the NWO Wolfpack, there was Sting in the Rafters, all of these different things. But at the end of the day, a good guy and a bad guy got in the ring and fought. And there's simple storytelling in that. At the end of the day, in this Charles Bukowski poem, the good guy, the speaker, and the bad guy, Sorrow, they're fighting in this poem. They go back and forth. And this is why I think we have seen some of the reemerge. There's a lot of simple type poems in very simple type collections that have hit the mainstream in the last couple of years, the last few years, and gone astronomical. There is within me the roiling, unctuous desire to criticize and make fun of and critique these forms of poetry. But I have to keep reminding myself that is counterproductive. You should not do that. There's a reason people connect with those poems. There's a reason people connect with pop songs. You meet a person, you meet an audience where that audience is. So, for the example of the professional wrestling, when I was in high school, it was not the wrestling which was interesting to me. It was the factions. But catching someone younger, the wrestling was the most interesting part. This is why wrestling has been called, soap operas for men, right? You catch an audience where they are, and that allows you the ability. So when I was real little, wrestling was big. The early 90s craze of wrestling, the late 80s craze of wrestling. Macho Man Randy Savage in all the colors, as opposed to all the tight black shirts and pants and stuff. The neon colors of the 80s and 90s. These were the wrestlers with whom I first fell in love. The Hulk Hogans of the world, the Ultimate Warriors of the world. When it was two guys getting into the ring and wrestling. I had no idea about the storylines. It was not until later that I understood the storylines. But when I was able to understand the storylines, I already knew what the wrestling was. So when someone is first getting into poetry like this, the Milk and Honey, the Bukowski, things like that. Milk and Honey, like Milk and Honey, I can't remember exactly what the title of the collection is, but that type of poetry, they need. So this sounds very condescending, but that's not how I mean it. This is the type of, I love this poetry. You meet an audience where they are. My poetry, my taste for poetry, still likes somebody coming off the top turnbuckle. I still like that in my poetry. The Milk and Honey crowd still likes that in their poetry. They still like the flash of someone coming off the top rope and ending in a 1, 2, 3. There is nothing to be looked down on with that. But the elites, the gatekeepers who call themselves elites, maybe we should stop using elites. Maybe we should start saying gatekeepers, because that's what they are. They've got the smarmy little hands on access, and they're the funnelers. Funnelers. Maybe that's what we'll go with. This type of, what I'm getting around to, what I'm trying to say, type of poetry is important. Bukowski has some much more nuanced poetry than this. But if you're not ready to find that poem where you are, it won't make any sense to you when you happen across it. That is all I have for this poetry discussion here on the channel. I upload videos Monday, Wednesday, and Friday on this channel. Mondays always are for poetry. So I hope to see you next time for another video.